Hello, my name is Chris Barrett, and this is the Comparative Politics Research presentation for Week 2, Dr. Curry. Individual liberty is likely to lead to increased wealth in a body. But what about the economic or socioeconomic status of those living in the country? In the Dinkovic and Eastwood's Comparative Politics book, The Integrating Methods, Theories, and Cases, they state that everything has a theory. And what this means is you're going to have a hypothesis, and you're going to be able to test a hypothesis. You're going to be able to use this like a scientific method of sorts to test this hypothesis. You're going to ask the why question, as we talked about in week 1, to where you get those clear-cut answers instead of the cookie-cutter answers. A hypothesis will allow you to take data, and from there you can form your theory or opinion defense. The text also states, and the kind of hypothesis that they look at and test is in the text, is that wealthier states are more likely to be democratic than poorer states. However, the statement is not meant to be that every rich country will be a democracy, nor will all poor countries be under authoritative order. This is a theory backed by research, and the first step of this is on page 33 of the textbook, which is something that I'll get to in just a second. But it's based upon the choices that the country's citizens get to make when it comes to their jobs, their education, and things of that nature. We know here in the United States that we get the freedom of choice. Where we want to go to school, what we want to study, what kind of job we want to go into. In a lot of places, that's just not the case. They're going to be made to pursue careers and education that benefit the entire country instead of what their needs are, what their interests are, and that can be tough. Citizens can be very unhappy, and it's just overall. I believe it allows for more growth when it comes to a society whenever you have democracy. But looking at this, a democratic society allows for its citizens to choose how much education they obtain. And that goes because, we look at here in the United States, and it's not going to be like that in every country, but here in the United States, you're paid by the type of education that you get. The higher education that you obtain, the higher pay grade that you're going to have. Whereas a poorer country with lower economic status may require their citizens to go into employment fields that fit the country's needs instead of their own. And as we look at a study performed by MIT, Peter Dyseks, he was looking at this same exact thing that we're getting ready to get into with Dinkovic and Eastwood's book. He was quoted in an article saying, a new study co-authored by an MIT economist shows that when it comes to growth, democracy significantly increases development. Indeed, countries switching to democratic rule experience a 20% increase in GDP over a 25-year period compared to what would have happened had they remained authoritarian states. And that's what this research was showing them. But getting back to Dinkovic and Eastwood, if you look on page 33 of this textbook, you'll see a graph with 2 maps on it of the world. This shows the GDP per capita on top right here, and it is labeled, as you can see, by different tiers. There is approximately 6 tiers, with the shade of green being the highest and purple being the lowest per capita. And this is where we start to see a little bit of a trend. We start to see that the countries that have democracy, you're going to start to see a trend between these two. But we're also going to see where it's not necessarily going to be the hypothesis that we made is going to also come into this here in just a second. But the top is from 2009, a country's GDP per capita as percentage of world average. And as you can start to see, United States here, Australia, Ireland, Norway, we're starting to see these countries that have democracy, they also have the highest GDP per capita. But if we go down here to this second one, this is a map of democracy in the world since 2017, or in 2017, I'm sorry. Again, the green is free, the yellow is partially free, and then the purple is not free. If we look at this map, we can see a correlation between the top and the bottom for the most part. The United States, Australia, all those countries that we just talked about up here in the top are also green down here. Now, there is some differences. As you can see here, the economy isn't as good in some of these states or these countries that they are free. One of those examples is actually in Mongolia. Mongolia is in the bottom tier per capita of GDP in the top graph, but also a democracy or free country, which is even more data going towards proving providing and proving information, prove that hypothesis we talked about. Next, in Glenn Martin's book, Prevailing Worldviews in Western Society, it states that the first 4 words of the Bible are without question the most instructive words from God to man. And those words, as we all know, are in the beginning, God. This is important because God is the one constant within our lives. Every person has a plan in place, and God has a journey for each of us. Martin goes on to explain different examples of God allowing men to make choices, but God's plan is what it all comes back to. And again, if you turn to, if you get out Glenn R. Martin's Prevailing Worldviews of Western Society since 1500, and you look on page 43, right here we have a little model that has, as you can see, it has God up top. And then down here, it has law, school, church, civil, social, arts, economics, international relations. What this is telling us is God is the constant. God is the one thing that is going to keep us on the road to what we need to be, where we need to be. He also talks about the holy commonwealth, or the covenantal arrangement. God is over all of life and is reaching to relate with men and all of his affairs, both individual and institutional. God is a part of everything we do in life. This can mean our personal life and who we spend it with, or what we do, or even our political life or beliefs. The recognition that God is over our lives, no area accepted in the sovereignty of God, institutionalized. What this means is that if you believe in God, it is important to have faith that God isn't going to give you more than you can handle. You trust the plan. You put your full faith in Him. Remember that He's in control. God sent His only begotten Son to die on the cross for our sins in order that we can have everlasting life. So He's not going to give us too much more than we can handle. And the plan that He has, He loves all of His children, and that's something we always have to remember. An example of everything we've kind of been talking about, and a little bit of the individual liberties and providing wealth. An example of this would be the French Revolution. The people of France were starving. The country was in turmoil. Democracy was failing in France, as well as absolutism. As we know, Napoleon came in and he had to assume power. And in an article lesson that I found on the rise of Napoleon, I thought they had a really good quote looking at this. And he said the French people had had enough of the political quarrels in France and now looked for strong leadership in Napoleon. Napoleon wanted to separate political power from social power, which meant that power, whether it was elected or appointed, was to be those who held office rather than those who was wealthy or born into power. This meant that people were going to have a say in who will have power, not just gifted because you have the highest honor. This proved that not every country cannot be successful under democracy. France today is flourishing, and it's because of these acts that they are. And the last thing, within the Dinkovich and the Eastwood text, they talk a little bit about communism and how communism looks good on paper. And it does. It's something that even today we find that people see some way or form of communism and think that it's something that can be accomplished or is good for us. And on paper, it works out. Everything works out the way it is. However, it takes away many people's individual liberty. Therefore, communism isn't something that can go hand in hand with democracy. If we look at the French Revolution, those in power were living large, but the country and its citizens were starving and no longer had individual liberties. On an individual level, going back to our GDP graph in our textbooks and our hypothesis that we were trying to test, you can see a correlation with the highest GDP per capita. And it revolves around the country's democracy, which it shows individual liberty can likely lead to wealthier economical states. And just to kind of back up a little bit of what we're saying, in a Washington Post article that I found, Daniel Treisman, it's called the Economic Development Promotes Democracy, but there's a catch. And within this article, he talks about authoritarian leaders are more likely to libertize early in their terms than later, which means that as the status quo gets set, and we just keep going on and on and on with the same authoritarian leaders, it's less likely that a democracy or liberties, individual liberties, will be preserved or given later on through an authoritarian leader. That is it. I appreciate you listening, and thank you.